Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you do that and tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free 30-minute consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings for 2025. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter, where I have been publishing my training journal weekly, as well as other topic-based posts. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. A big thanks to Element, Delta G Ketones, Kerans, and Maui Nui Venison for supporting the podcast. A full description of how I use these products can be found at the end of the episode. Discounts, promotions, and details can also be found in the show notes and at the end of each episode. Yeah. Have you gotten out and run on many of the trails yet?
Yeah. So I have we are actually about less than an hour from like an actual rainforest. We're actually right at the edge of it, but like we're less than an hour to a really nice trailhead into a pretty crazy rainforest. And we like expected that it would be nice. It's on so for reference, it is on, we live right in the area. The only like notable, the only thing of note that's ever really happened in this area is Twilight was filmed here, the vampire movie. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Indian reservation in that, the Kinuit Native American reservation, it's like they changed like 2 letters of the name, but long story short, they have some amazingly beautiful land, and the culture in itself is just really fascinating, especially for a guy like me. But the very rich material culture, specifically material and spiritual. But long story short, in that area, they have some amazing rainforests, and we headed out and started exploring, and it's just amazing. But right now, most of my miles are road and sand, just getting acclimated for the big one coming up. And fortunately, I have plenty of beach access and plenty of roads out here.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think if I remember right, when we were chatting last, you were saying that the route is going to have a lot of kind of sandy type surface to run over. So that's always kind of an interesting element or variable to deal with.
Yeah, it was definitely something I'd want to pick your brain on. But yeah, the breakdown is roughly 400 miles of sand, 400 miles of road, and it'll be a little more than 300 of trail. So Overall distance is going to be, depending on a few route variables, it's going to be basically within about 1,100 miles, give or take, about 40 miles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is an interesting breakup. Is it pretty dispersed with that, or are you hitting like a huge chunk of each all at once?
I think it's going to be just a lot of back and forth, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually probably better, because I was thinking about that just in general, in terms of how to kind of choose your battles when it comes to hiking versus running. And, when you get into events as long as this, 1,000 miles, there's just going to skew a lot more towards hiking than what you'd see in shorter endurance races. And that just kind of opens up a whole nother set of sort of thoughts to, at least with the peaking phase, and even to some degree with like the build-up phase, because you're almost in a different discipline at that point when you're doing that much hiking. But if we're looking at it through the lens of you're going to do some running and some hiking, or like shuffling versus just like legit 1 foot on ground at all times, I think we're probably looking at like, let's try to strategize in a way where when you do the running side of things, focusing on the paved versions, and then the hiking on the sand, just because you're going to lose so much more efficiency trying to run in the sand versus hiking. And I bet it squares away in terms of you moving a little bit quicker on the more firm surfaces when you do have them versus that soft sand side of things.
Copy that. Yeah, that's actually hugely valuable, because I really had no idea how to approach that. And my only real input on the pacing stuff was like, I need some running just for like mental sanity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you need to switch things up enough with that, I think, where you don't feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. I think that's really helpful from the mental side. So, yeah, no, it sounds like you've got like pretty good specifics to prepare for it though, which is always nice. I think getting fit is probably the biggest variable, but then from there, if you can do that, then kind of getting some specifics on what you're going to actually surfaces you're going to be on is going to be kind of another layer of importance.
Right. So, and then also, just also, I guess for anyone that has, well, actually, since we last spoke, a few things have changed. Before, originally, I was just kind of stick with the roughly the CCT and just kind of jam up the coast.
Mhm.
Um, I had originally kind of come in with like a mind for breaking the FKT because it's a newer trail, and I'm very confident that I could significantly beat the current FKT by a pretty significant margin. But then as I started kind of looking at this area, and are you familiar with a guy named Daniele Bolelli by chance?
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, so he's a good buddy of mine. I'll be, just a couple of history geeks, obviously,
Yeah.
and so just whenever I'm in Southern California, we hang out, or I do his podcast, or um, whatever. But point being, we were like, the more I was talking and hanging out with him, the more I was just kind of realizing I'm just running through like essentially a big series of like Native American archaeological sites and historical sites. And when we started looking at this, I started looking at it and kind of bouncing some ideas off him. Uh, we basically realized that there was a giant Native American warpath and trade network that ran from Mexico, into the Pacific Northwest.
Hmm.
Um, and we're like, well, how cool would it be to literally reconstruct that? Because it hasn't ever been fully reconstructed. People know about sections of it, like usually as it applies to Spanish missions and whatnot. And then they don't realize that when the Spaniards, again, just a small amount of historical context, when the Spaniards got to California and started exploring, they had no idea. They didn't have like any accurate maps. They didn't have any accurate data. They weren't experienced with the land, the wildlife, it was very, very different than anything they'd seen before in Spain or in Mexico up to that point. And so essentially, they were very, very fortunate to find a native population with a lot of goodwill. Natives in California were very different from a lot of pretty much the rest of the country because they were living, for lack of a better term, in Eden. They were protected on one side by the Sierra Nevadas, so they didn't get any of like the continental warfare. They were pretty isolated. California was so mild and so rich in its ecosystems that they never even had to develop agriculture. There was just
Mm.
berries and nuts and fish and meat year round. So they, unlike the rest of pretty much anywhere else you go in the North American continent, you have maize, you have different staple crops outside of some of the nomadic populations that popped up a little later with horses. But point being, these were some very prosperous and very friendly native populations. And so when the Spaniards got there, they didn't encounter much hostility, and they were very willingly shown like, oh, hey, you're going through our lands, like these are the paths we use. And so what became, tragically, what later became the Spanish Mission Pass, and a lot of the trails used, or the roads used by Spanish military expeditions against these native people, were just their own native trade routes and stuff. And then these mission paths would become Highway 101 and Highway 1 that run, the main north-south routes through California coastal region to this day. And so when we started looking at that, like that saved a lot of time, because it's like, oh, hey, like that accounts for a pretty, reconstruction wise, like that saves a lot of time when we know that, but then you start looking at little things, coastal points. There's also going to be a few points where I move inland, that brings me to another thing too. So I'm going to be looking for, in that kind of 35 to 40 miles a day, every day. Not planning on doing any 0 days or rest days. Ideally, you never know. But the days on one particular, there will be 2 days where I have to hit 57 miles, and those will
Hmm.
be my two peak days. And those are just basically getting in to see the Painted Rock Fortress on the coast, which is kind of, anyway, Central California. It's a good ways inland, and the fastest, most direct route we can find is about 57 miles by foot. And just for time frame, like with the documentary crew and with everything else, we're just kind of, there's certain points I have to make certain points in order to rendezvous with crews and filming and
Hmm.
supplies and that. So anyway, long story short, not running the actual California Coast Trail, running an ancient Native American warpath slash trade route that we're reconstructing, and going to be visiting some pretty cool stuff along the way. But that does mean that there will be a couple days where mileage gets up to 57 miles, 2 days in particular, back to back days, most likely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think when you have like that added value of something that you're interested in outside of just the movement itself, it kind of just feeds into just the motivation and the desire to kind of hit the benchmarks. So it just adds to the why of everything. You know, that's one of the biggest questions a lot of times I'll have with coaching clients is like, you know, what's the reason behind this event versus whatever else you could be doing? And the more kind of motivated you can get around certain aspects of things, like maybe it's something special about the route or something unique to you in that specific area, it just adds another level of things to grasp to when it gets tough, because that's the thing that we know for sure will happen is things will get tough, and then you have to be really interested in what you're doing to kind of want to go that extra bit to get what you where you want. But it's also good to know just generally speaking, kind of those distance markers and what kind of it takes in there. Because the way I look at a lot of this is like a lot of it is just managing not getting hurt. So, like, not having something that will really cause you to slow down. And when you have the way I usually like to look at this is where is our kind of like range between conservative to aggressive? And if on average we're leaning towards more conservative, then it's just a little bit more reasonable in terms of like, okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves because one, you don't need to, so why invite unnecessary risk?
Right.
And then two, it gives you a little bit of flexibility if you do need it because you're not necessarily stretching yourself thin or as thin as you could by reaching up to like some number that would maybe be stretchy to your capacity. Compound that over days and weeks, and then you have like things like sleep disruption and things like that. So that's usually kind of the good starting point. Um, I think I think the focal point maybe would be like, let's take a look at kind of when and where those longer sections where you're going to have to stretch yourself a little thinner
Okay.
and maybe kind of look at what that maybe means for the day prior and after in terms of kind of supporting yourself to be able to take on a little bit of a bigger challenge on those days. And it may be that it's just, okay, I'm just going to be out there on my feet a little bit longer this day and I lose a couple hours of sleep on top of what I would normally get, which probably won't be problematic in the grand scheme of things since it's not every day. But I think being kind of cautious around those is usually the way to go about it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the way that breaks down in general, just in terms of my personal capacity, 57 is at the outer edge of my repeatable capacity day in and day out. Like, when I'm on the PCT doing the longer step, it's like this 50 to 55. That's a pretty hot day for me.
Hmm.
But I can repeat, like, I could do that every day for a week for sure.
Yeah.
A month, definitely different. The main, I don't know, perhaps you could tell me, I'm not sure if this is more of an asset or more of a challenge, but our long sections are going to be relatively early on. So these 257 days are going to be in upper SoCal, you know what I mean? But it's like maybe near the 1/3 point overall, quarter or a third of the way in. And then in that week, we're going to have about a 300. I think I'll have to look, but I believe it's like 312 or 320 miles that week. And that'll be the hottest week. But that's just, again, to time external constraints. And that'll be essentially all in our first week. And then, or roughly it's like day 2 to 9 or something like that. And then after that, we'll have a little bit more flexibility in terms of pacing and cushion.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think like when I look at some of the stuff, and I mean, the fun thing about this project is there's not necessarily a definitive correct answer. So, so it's kind of like looking at, okay, what have we seen done in here, and what we're like, is there any kind of signal through the variety that we see out there? And the thing that stands out when I talk to people doing these long multi-week things is they usually feel like that first week or so almost feels like a little challenging mentally because things feel like they're kind of progressively breaking down. And then it sort of just normalizes and you almost kind of adapt to what you're doing and your body sort of accepts. This is probably stuff that you recognized when you did your 500 miler and things like that, where it was like, all right, you hit a point where you're kind of a little bit more in a balance. And I mean, obviously you're fatigued and there's challenges and things like that, but it goes from, okay, we're progressively getting driven further down to we've hit that point and things maybe even start perceptually improving from that kind of low point. So in terms of like how that what that means for loading different distances or durations, I think like ideally I would say hitting those early is probably not a bad idea because you are going to be relatively fresher than if you say you had those really long sessions at the very tail end of it. Um, but if it's not like day two or day one, that's probably better too because you're not kind of in that transition phase any longer. If you're hitting that maybe like a few days out versus in the very, very beginning. Uh, the other advantage of having those longer stretches near the end is you probably would start feeling like, all right, I can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel. So from a motivation factor, but at the end of the day, you work with what you got and you end up looking at, okay, here's how this has to play out in order for this to be successful. And then you build the best plan within that. So, um, if it's something where like, hey, I've got to hit a couple really big days and say like that first week, then that might just impact the way that we prepare going into the project versus a scenario where you're kind of easing into things and then hitting big days, in which case we almost look at maybe the start of the project as being kind of that final stage of what you would maybe normally do for a project of this size, where you kind of like you're sort of like phasing into the project itself to some degree. Uh, but I think if that's coming up a little bit sooner, we don't want that 57-mile day to hit you so hard that you're all of a sudden just like, really struggling to get things back together for like a few days after that. So if it's early enough, we want to make sure you're ready for that. The other thing might just be how aggressive you get within the distances that you're doing the days around it. So it could just be like if we come up with sort of like a rotation of hiking and running, we skew towards a little bit more hiking than normal on the day before and the day after, just so we're not loading as much when you're going to be out there on your feet a little bit more for those longer days. And
Right.
since they're probably shorter days, though they're shorter than the longer day for sure, they're closer to that kind of normal benchmark you're making. You probably have a little bit more of a time flexibility there in terms of being able to just take it a little bit slower than maybe you would if you had just a consistent 30, 40 mile each day.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. So then like doing the math and yeah, we're coming out in the high 30s to low 40s per day on average. And then so if like I said, those two back-to-back 57-mile days, there's no reason that you can't do like a 30-mile day before and after that, or even 2 days after. We also have the benefit that stretch is going to be within like an hour and a half's drive to my grandma's house, so I can
Hmm.
actually have like grandma cooked meal and a bed to
There you
sleep in,
go. Yeah. Uh-huh.
not just on nights before and after, but on the night in between, because what does that shake? 114 miles in 48 hours or so, which is pretty, you know what I mean? Like put an emphasis on hiking. Also, most of that's road too. So I'm not going to be fighting through sand and that. I'm literally running on farm roads for most of that.
Hmm.
Um, and which also means direct support, vehicle, my team can come and draw, switch up, bring me a hot meal, do whatever at any point, so I'm not roughing it like I would be on the PCT.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, I mean, it's definitely feasible that we soften the edges around, before and after that 100, and then maybe kind of just set more of like an overall, like, I don't know what, 3.5, 4, just a little bit shorter overall pace, on those days, and maybe take some of the impact out of it.
Just a quick reminder, Maui Nui venison is one of my favorite protein sources. The reason, they have balanced an invasive species, the axis deer, that is devastating to the Maui habitat if not kept in check, all while providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat source you will find. Consider letting them know that you heard of them from me by taking a look at their website at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. You can also check out the full description of how I use Maui Nui venison at the end of the episode. Hmm. Yeah, that's actually interesting too, the way you described it too, because I think even with the added distance on those 2 days, the fact that you have access to your crew in that
Mhm.
area, and then it's a little bit, it could be that you're not spending all that much more time on those days because of the more road sections, better access to support, and just maybe a little bit higher motivators through that section than what you're going to get if you're out there remotely by yourself for longer periods of time. So, yeah, you know what would be interesting? Sometimes with like routes like this and setups like this, it just kind of becomes a thing of like maybe we do like a dress rehearsal, depending on timeline, where we just stretch out a couple of days in training where you're kind of replicating that section
Okay.
and get an idea of like, well, how fast can you move on this with relatively fresh legs? And then start looking at, okay, what are we thinking about from a time perspective on that section? Then when we start adding in like, okay, well, you're probably gonna be a little bit slower during the event and everything that kind of goes into that and just get an idea of how big of a bolus that's actually going to be so that we kind of know what level of conservativeness is necessary around it and also just come up with just certain things that maybe stand out between being on that type of terrain versus the other ones in terms of how your body responds so that you're not kind of throwing things up against the wall to correct if things pop up, but you're looking at it through the lens of, okay, this is what will likely occur if it's here are the things, here are the hurdles that'll likely occur, and here are the solutions, or here are the things that I would have available to me to kind of to remedy those. So the way I look at it is the more kind of strategy you have between knowing that you probably won't be able to predict things perfectly, but being able to have kind of a short list of here's the options I have available when this happens, the more you kind of have that already loaded in your mind, the better you're going to be able to just pivot to it a little more intuitively versus sitting there and kind of second guessing whether you made the right. You've already kind of gone through that process ahead of time. So you're not burning all that mental energy trying to problem solve on the fly. You're kind of picking from your set of options that are available that we've predetermined are what you have access to.
Nice. Yeah, we greased that groove. That makes sense. So yeah, as far as I know, you and I have talked about this before, but if anyone listening, that we're approaching the training on this, kind of differently instead of building up to a peak like I would for a 100 or a 200 miler. Obviously, you can't maintain a peak for 30 days of running or however
Yeah.
long. So, as we talked about, I think in our last pod, we're focusing a lot on strength conditioning, building baseline capacities, and then essentially treating the start of the event as like the start of the peak, as you would the start of a peak training cycle. And then putting a lot of, like we talked about, like we referenced, putting a lot of time and energy into not getting injured. So,
Mhm.
the high strain areas, the calves, the old injuries, et cetera, et cetera. And then the main other, like low, I've been doing very low intensity long runs per month, and 3 on 1 off, you deload week style. Usually something like 32 to 34 miles in 7.5 hours. Nothing too crazy. Just getting that volume and capacity maintaining, because I know I can do that more or less indefinitely without like there's no peaking involved for that. That's essentially
Mhm.
a long hike. And then I did a 3 day. Let me see. This would be about 9 weeks. So 1 week, yes. Let me do the math. Yeah, so essentially about 10 weeks before the event, I did a 3 day boot camp where I just did 100 miles in 3 days.
Mhm.
Surface accurate too, almost entirely on cement and sand, and came out of that feeling weirdly unaffected. Which again, it's only 3 back-to-back long days of running, but still didn't felt weirdly unaffected. Like you too, this year I had a very short off season and came out of it still feeling pretty rejuvenated. And I don't think I lost much baseline conditioning between the holiday ultras that I ran and now. So anyway, I came out of that 3 day block feeling really good. I think tomorrow or the next day flying to SoCal, and I'm doing a little 24-hour ultra down there with a couple of my team guys. I believe it is the Beyond Limits Ultra. But it's
Okay.
like, I guess that's a big ultra festival they do. It's supposed to be, there's like, they have games and fun stuff for the crew to do archery, and it's like kind of an ultra marathon fair sort of thing. And then I'm taking one of my guys out for his first ultra, and then a second guy from my team for his second like long ultra. And so we're just gonna kind of go have fun of it. I'm just gonna use it as a training race, and then
Cool.
my final little boot camp will be 2.5 weeks before the event. I have a 5 day, same thing, just essentially 30 35 a day, 5 days surface accurate training. And I think that would be obviously an ideal time to do some, maybe like run this test that we're talking about here and kind of check
Hmm.
on some of the, grease the groove on some of the mental mechanisms as well as logistical mechanisms, but also find out kind of like, what's the next 2 days going to be like that after, or, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like with your structure, I would be less concerned about just the actual doing of the event. I think that's going to be probably the easier part for you. I think the th thing that we want to be there are some variables that are maybe worth kind of playing around with or considering and thinking about is just like fueling, hydration, and then just management of things that are breaking down a little bit more than others, probably more like skin related stuff or blister related stuff,
Okay.
chafing related stuff, that sort of thing. Um, so you probably have enough information from what you've done prior, just where like some weak spots are, and
Yeah.
then we would just want to kind of take inventory of those and know like, all right, do we have a way to prevent this by either just bolstering that area or having the right stuff along so that if something does flare up in that area and creates a kind of a point of problem that you're able to remedy it. And a lot of that, I think, whatever we come up with that based on prior experiences, then we can just stress test it with that five
Okay.
day thing,
Okay.
2.5 weeks out, which is kind of perfect. I think that's going to be a really good kind of final push to get you ready for it and stay on top of that stuff. So, I mean, we can do things as simple as just um, looking at like average workload for what you're trying to do and kind of coming up with like this is roughly how much energy you're probably going to require from one day to the next.
Right.
We can do fluid loss rate stuff where we're looking at okay in these type of climates. What I like to do with fluid loss a lot of times is we'll pick a cool day, a moderate day, and a hot day, and we'll just run like a 1 hour like fluid loss test for you and just see like what are we looking at from a range from like when it's nice out, I'm probably losing this much, when it's hot out this much, and then kind of somewhere in the middle this much. And then you sort of have like a range just from planning purposes. Not that you're necessarily going to stick to it perfectly, but it gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of if you are kind of slipping outside of that and noticing some fatigue related to maybe some of that, like where the problem is, so you know like where the remedy points would probably be most focused on versus trying to do something like what I think sometimes happens in ultra marathons is there's the fueling and the hydration is important, but I think a lot of times people gravitate towards the fueling side of it because that one just kind of intuitively makes sense. It's like kind of like if I don't put gas in my car, it stops running eventually, despite how good the car may be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but water and fluid are kind of I look at it this way, when you're out there for really long periods of time, you're you're more likely to exceed your processing limits of loss from fluid than you are from fuel, especially at low intensity stuff. We can probably hit and exceed if we wanted to your fuel intake, and your body could break down, process, and use that over the course of a day. But we may not be able to do that with fluid. So we may be trying to target something that is good versus great and managing it versus optimizing it. And when we have a scenario like that, then I want less mistakes made on the hydration side
Okay.
because hydration is also gonna amplify any other problem if it goes wrong. If you get dehydrated, all of a sudden fueling gets more difficult. All of a sudden, like use of caffeine isn't as effective. Your general state of just like how you feel out there is going to be lower than average and things like that. So it's just one of those mistakes that I think carries a lot higher of a consequence at the end of the day than some of the other things that maybe look on paper as being more important or just stand out a little more clearly.
That makes sense. And also, I mean, it seems like it's more likely to cascade and harder to stop once it starts, especially with day
Mhm.
after day after day. It's like, oh, hey, so I was 2,000 calories short on my food yesterday, but I'm going to make up, maybe even hit a 500 calorie excess today. And in time, it'll balance out. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whereas with
Yeah.
hydration, it's like, like if you get behind, it's pretty hard to catch up on it, properly and give your, day after day at least. So that makes more
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And if you get severely dehydrated, there can be a carryover of that for up to 48 hours. So, and then you have the added stress point with this where like it's not like that next day you just sit around and do nothing and catch up on hydration. It's like you're out there probably driving it a little further. So you're trying to catch up and depleting at the same time, to a larger degree. So that's one I always think is probably worth really. really paying attention to and getting dialed in.
Okay. Yeah, it's cool. I just signed as a sponsored athlete with Transparent Labs.
Oh,
They're,
cool.
yeah, great. I mean, for anyone who's, they work, I think they work with at least one other runner. I think they work with Cam Haynes' son, but
Oh, true.
like they're, yeah, but their main athletes, I'm joining the Mountain from Game of Thrones, Max Holloway from the UFC, and Paul Sklar, who I guess is like a middle, like basically a fitness guy who just doesn't age. Like he just looks amazing at like,
Mhm.
whatever age he is. And so I'll be joining them as transparent athletes. But point being, they have an amazing, like they're so dialed in. They have their products are so clean. Everything is, their electrolyte formula is coconut powder based and all these things. So it's they're going to be have me very well supplied, and pretty much any specific needs I can get from them too. They have good cluster dextrose, that all the stuff that we would need for all the stuff that us long milers are always craving.
Hmm. Yeah.
But and then I have we've talked about this too, but getting back to it, I have spent about the last 6 months getting pretty fat adapted, not
Hmm.
ketogenic or anything, but pretty definitely more fat than I've ever had in my diet, both at a baseline and performing. Still bring carbs with me, when I'm moving, but I don't do very much pace. And if I'm not doing a lot of hills, I find I don't actually need too many.
Hmm.
Not to the order that I was consuming them before, and then with carb loading too, instead of just going crazy for like 48 hours before, I just do 72 or so more slow carbs, kind of a lot of yams and potatoes. We were
Hmm.
talking on Instagram. The Japanese yams
Yeah.
are
Yeah. Yeah.
they're a big favorite. So you got the Murasaki ones with the purple skin and the white flesh are very good. I recommend, if you haven't tried the solid purple ones all the way through, those have the highest antioxidant count. And those are the ones Janae doesn't like. She likes the white skin or the white fleshed ones more, but I eat both like constantly. She makes
Huh.
meal prep's a big thing of mashed sweet potato and just keeps it in the fridge. So it's like, you know what I mean? Super.
That's been my kick lately. My carb source has been potatoes, so I've been kind of going through the varieties out there. And yeah, I'll just make like a mash and I'll put like a bunch of like ground beef or eggs or something in there and then just have it in the fridge. So it makes it really easy to stick to the plan because it's just there and it's easy and you don't have to prep 3, 4 times a day. You kind of do it once and then have it. But I think we do have the purple flesh potato. I forget which would one that what the specific name of that one is, but um at the Sprouts near our house. So I think
Yeah.
I need to go over there and just grab a couple of them and put that into the rotation too. So
They're
uh
also that's that longevity food too. The Okinawa ones are big, but
yeah.
that's like the anthocyanins. But that's so yeah, the wild blueberries and then various yams and potatoes. That's my main carb sources. But
Hmm.
the potatoes in general, man, that's the Incan Chasqui runners. I mean, the Incans they had some of the best runners, like just because, and it wasn't even like an athletic or a genetic thing. I mean, it was, but it was just like the way that their empire was set up, and they didn't have horses, and they had a massive empire that stretched long. It's like the size of ancient Rome, but without a horse messenger system,
Hmm.
and just relay upon relay. But they, same thing. They were big, big like potatoes above all, and then we had corn and quinoa and stuff too. But I've been getting more into the like the new world dietary stuff lately. Just, or not getting more, but making it a bigger part of my nutrition, and even little things, getting a little more bison and a little more game meat than
Hmm.
just always going with beef and whatnot. But yeah, so I've long story short, been basically eating a lot, like finding a good way to balance eating for health and performance.
Just a quick reminder that Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte source. They are offering a free sample pack with purchase for all HPO listeners. Just head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO and check out my full description of how I use Element at the end of the episode. Yeah. Yeah, there's sometimes it's fun too because it's like you have like a target with kind of a story behind it or something in it that
Oh
kind
yeah.
of motivates you outside of just like fuel in, fuel out.
No, it does, and I mean, I'm one of the I'm like a, I don't know, you call it symbolic people, a romantic or a mythological person, but stuff like that for me, like it rings my bell. It's like That's one reason that it's, I do my workouts like designed after Apache runners and samurai stone lifters, all this stuff, because
Hmm.
for me it's like that is just, it speaks to something in me that lifting a dumbbell in the gym doesn't. And same thing with the diet, but at the end of the day, it's, whatever works for everyone. I just did a an Aztec project, and it was almost entirely vegetarian. It was pretty interesting, and it wasn't,
Mhm.
it's just because they didn't have livestock, and so most of, they actually, most of their protein came from aquatic sources, so fish and amphibians and insects, tons of
Hmm.
grasshoppers and stuff. So like when you go to Mexico and you have the chocolate covered grasshoppers, and like that goes back to Aztec times, and then turkeys, and then they even had a few, like, it's kind of sad, but a few special breeds of dog, not dog pets, but like livestock.
Sure.
But it was just because they didn't have cattle, they didn't, so it was deer, turkey, and then a lot of aquatic stuff, and then crickets and edible dogs. But point being that I was doing that, and it's just, they had a, amaranth was a big staple that we don't really use a lot. It's also a very good, like, low glycemic, high like I'm sorry, low glycemic index, like high micronutrient density, slow release carb that's just excellent for endurance pursuits. Like all these little things that just, not to like touch on the food spiracy side of things, but it's like we went pretty hard after wheat as like, a staple. And there was a lot of stuff, like there's a lot, even buckwheat, things like this, like a lot of alternate carb sources that are, they just have a lot more nutrient density, lower glycemic
Hmm.
index, higher protein. And so I've been looking a lot more into like the Native American and New World carb sources. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of like practicality from just like a macronutrient target thing for this too, like we can get pretty precise with that and just make sure that you're not overdoing the carb sources
Yeah.
and just but getting what you need too. Like the way I usually look at this is if we just assume the average endurance athlete moderate high carbohydrate diet, at their aerobic threshold, they're going to be like a 50-50 split between carbs and fats. So we can just look at what their workload is at their aerobic threshold and get an idea of just like, oh, well, what kind of carb inputs are going to be required to defend their onboard liver and muscle glycogen stores.
Right.
And then if we start getting into the low carb world, like someone like myself, or like sounds like what you've been doing more recently, is from a lot of the different and you could probably go and get a test on this if you wanted to, just to kind of see where your points are. I mean, if you get just like most people use these just to pinpoint like their VO2 max, their lactate threshold, their aerobic threshold, and things like that. The cool thing that you usually get with those reports is it also shows your fuel substrate utilization across that intensity spectrum. So you can see like, oh, at my aerobic threshold, I'm actually this versus the average 50-50 for a moderate high carb athlete. So most of the low carbers that I've worked with and myself are, we're usually closer to 80, maybe 90% fat at aerobic threshold. And that's just a different, input for that equation then. So like if you're working that intensity, whatever workload that is per hour, that's kind of the target you're going to want to plug in, which just comes out to be a lot less necessary intra workout carb fueling than you would do on the other side of things. So we can probably assume pretty safely that like aerobic thresholds the ceiling of the intensity you'll be hitting during this project. So then if we looked at that as like that's the maximal amount of carbohydrate per hour you'd be needing, and we can apply that to just like the pace that you're generating, and you're just your normal kind of resting metabolic rate, energy expenditure stuff, and kind of figure out where, like, who knows, maybe it's like 500 calories per hour or something like that. If
Right.
we can generalize that you're burning 80% fat at that intensity, then we just want to make sure that 500 calories is 20% supported from the carbohydrate sources that you use, and and that's going to probably keep things moving in the right direction in terms of the fueling side of things.
Love it. That's honestly way more. It's just like a way more simplistically elegant and precise approach to what I've been doing. So that works.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I can confirm not. I haven't done any of the CHO testing or any of that stuff yet, or I haven't done anything like biometric at all, other than I know that my resting heart rate was 57 during a root canal. That my dentist told me that, and that's the only time I was like, okay. But I've just never. I think my agent's talking to, anyway, there might be something, I might be partnering with someone soon. So that might become a more regular thing, but yeah, I haven't checked any of that. But having said that, I do know that, just from trial and error that, yeah, that is that 80+%, lipid fueling sounds about right, just because I played with it. And then I know after, this last 2 months in particular of long runs, I've been playing with it more, particularly just initially with the types of fats, and then getting more dialed in on proportions and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that, yeah, and that, like, if I go out and I fuel in that 80, we'll call it 80% fats range, in session, I'm gonna come back without having many signs of carbohydrate depletion or anything like that. Like, I'm not gonna hit that wall that's crazy unless I throw in hills that I'm not prepared for or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I know that at that, like, moving at a 4 to 5, 4.5 mile overall pace, that I can do that on fat, like with very minimal carbohydrates,
Mm-hmm.
assuming the
Yeah.
ground is flat and,
Mm-hmm. And keeping your heart rate kind of lower. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and it is.
I tried. Yes, sir, good.
No, I was just gonna say it is one of those things where you'll be out on your feet long enough during the day that thinking of it outside of just carbohydrate intake is probably important too, just because you're not necessarily going to want to do all your fat and protein fueling, during resting phases, because one, you're going to want to be sleeping during a chunk of that, and then and maybe not digesting massive meals of food while you're trying to sleep. So I think that there's probably a lot of inputs there outside of just the carbohydrate side, but that's usually a good starting point at least.
It is, but that actually, you touched on something. I have a question for you. So I was thinking a simple solution for that might just be to add some scoops of collagen peptides into my drinks throughout the day, and that brings
Hmm.
that protein up. You know what I mean? And obviously, I'll have the more complete protein sources. And I'm eating meat or whatever, for dinner or before bed, whatnot. So it's like,
Hmm.
collagen has, it's higher in certain aminos that are harder or they're rare, but it's very low in the muscle recovery ones, like leucine and valine and isoleucine, the BCAAs that all the bros
Hmm.
talk about. But point being, I think that because it's super low impact on the stomach, it is most likely, at least indirectly, going to support connective tissue, and it's very good for gut health. So I was thinking that, like, that's a pretty simple. I like to find elegant simplicity, and that seems
Hmm.
like just throwing some of that in with, because I'm already adding MCT powder to, my drinkables and stuff. So it's like, a little collagen in there too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just the volume of food you'll end up taking in to make this work, you'll probably hit your protein targets pretty easily. And if you're kind of getting it in through the course of the day, then you'll definitely hit it. So, yeah, I like it. I think fueling is one where I was another piece to the puzzle that stood out to me when I've talked to people doing these longer projects, like specifically the Transcon. It was like when I would talk to someone who's done it more than once, I had a couple guys who they had done it two different ways actually, where one they like stayed within like a few pounds of their starting weight and also had ones where they lost like 20 plus pounds. And they were saying like the difference was night and day in terms of kind of how their body responded, even more so after, where they felt like when they finished, they bounced back relatively quick and kind of get back to whatever it is they wanted to do next, versus when they lost a bunch of weight, they felt like it was just like months and months of just kind of getting back to normalizing everything, which to some degree stands to reason if you're unless you're starting like well overweight, like you're probably going to be like below your performance threshold of weight when if you're losing that much, and then you got to gain it back essentially in a way that's productive versus just kind of getting fat by doing nothing and eating a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've done, I used to get fat in between camps just because, like, why not, but now the last year or so I've started to pay a lot more attention to my health in general, like, hormone levels, all that stuff.
Hmm.
But as far as this, I think maybe going in like 5 to 8 pounds heavier than I normally am isn't going to hurt me,
Hmm.
and it's not going to slow me down or like overload my joints the same way 20 pounds would, or something crazy.
Yeah.
And then just kind of having a little bit of a cushion, because we know that some days are not going to be perfect,
Hmm.
and then just coming in, but still just doing our best to get, 8,000 calories, at least, 8,000 calories a day.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I had a guy on the podcast recently, Akshay, and he's an Arctic explorer, and
Those
he's
are
done
cool,
some
man.
stuff in the past where, he's pulling heavy sleds on low impact stuff, so he can afford to be a fair bit heavier.
Yeah.
And he had like, I think he said when he was like an ultra runner, when he was just doing like single day ultras and stuff, he was pretty small. He was like 135 pounds.
Oh,
And
wow.
he got up to like 180 before some of his projects just because he was like, well, I'm going to be, for one specifically, he's going to be pulling a 400-pound dual sled setup. And it's like, yeah, I don't want that to be any heavier than it has to be. So to some degree, he's like, I'm going to like start heavy and then lose that along the way, and hopefully it just gets progressively easier as he gets lighter and the sled gets lighter. So
Well, also Arctic, you want some insulation on you, man. Like
yeah.
when you're lean, it's no, you go hunting during lean season, you feel it's way colder than going hunting when you got a little cushion on you for sure.
Hmm.
But yeah, I follow this girl on Instagram. She's one of those Arctic explorers, and she's always doing. She's a little thing too, but it's always hilarious because the sled's always like as tall as she is, but she's
Yeah.
out there. I'm like, dude, I think, and then they do some long stuff. I think I saw her doing something that was like 300 miles recently, and at a
Yeah.
pretty decent. I mean, like not like fast, like in the way that you and I would run a flatland ultra, but like they're logging some pretty decent miles per day, more than you would hiking for sure.
Yeah. 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 It's crazy when you start getting into the weather impacted routes and stuff like that, where you're out in the middle of nowhere in some pretty harsh conditions. So
I'd like to do one Arctic Ultra for sure. I know they're doing some stuff in Antarctica too, but I might just do like they had some cool stuff in like Finland. And there was one in Mongolia I was looking at, but it was just even for a slow turtle like me, it was a little too slow. It was something like like 5 days for 100 miles, something that was a little less than stimulating.
hmm.
But I would like to find some of those kind of cool like that. That's been more my thing now. I'd like to run. I'd like to maybe break 20 hours on 100 like that. That would be
Nice.
fun. Just like you know what I mean. I've never done it, and like that little taste. Oh, last time when I saw you down in when I broke my foot at Fat Ox, like up until mile 33 when that happened, like I was like, oh, I see. Like I was the first time when I was like, oh, I get speed. I understand speed now. Like this is very intoxicating. This is very enjoyable running fast. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so I would like to revisit that a couple more times, and maybe going after like a sub 20 miler would be a good excuse to just get out and do a bunch more speed work and
Yeah.
some more ultra 100 milers 24 or just do some 24-hour races, just go smoking.
Hmm.
But point being, outside of that, pretty much just prioritizing doing weirder and weirder ultras now, like for
Yeah.
lack of a better term.
I do like kind of going when, especially when you do something as long as what you're about to do, is after that doing something shorter that requires a little bit of a different input too, because you otherwise you can get so one-dimensional at a point where you start losing. Like you're the last person I worry about with this, because you kind of keep a lot of balance within your just general fitness when you're preparing for any of these things. But yeah, like what's the weak link after you finish 1,000-mile trip? It's probably something a little bit quicker that requires a little more running. So pivoting to a goal that kind of has that element is a little bit refreshing physically and mentally, I find.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I'm also going to have a good excuse for a pretty hard pivot because I'm going to visit. I've become buddies with the guy who runs Westside Barbell now that Louis Simmons passed away. And
Uh-huh.
so I'm like, I have a fall visit scheduled out there. So I'm like, all right, how many weeks do I need to get my body healed up so I can go, try to break some strength records with literally the strongest gym in the world.
Yeah. Good company over there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
definitely,
How
definitely.
is your
But
foot? Is your foot fully healed?
bro, like, I don't know if I told you, but the doctor said he's never seen bone heal as fast in his life. And I don't know
Really?
why.
Nice.
Yeah. He said it like he's literally never seen it. So basically, it feels good when it's cold. Still gets a little achy. I broke it in a really bad spot as a lateral break just behind the big toe,
Hmm.
and he said that it had started as probably just a stress fracture, but just by the going on it for 18 hours more, it was just a straight fracture by the time he said it had escalated to a fracture and already begun to heal by the time he saw it, which was
Hmm.
right when I got home. And so that was incredibly good. The bone is healed. I consulted with our friend Graham, the barefoot sprinter, and
Yeah.
he had me doing some stuff because I hadn't really considered that maybe I had to do some fascia stuff because the fascia might be different over that area where the bone is. There's a pretty, like, if you were to run your thumb over my foot, you can feel a calcified line there, and so it makes
Hmm.
sense that maybe there's some disruption and there's the fascia over that spot. Graham was telling me that essentially, like, just to picture like the inside of your muscle fibers and fascia is like sausage tubes, like casings
Hmm.
of sausage, and you have to kind of like work, like you don't want them to get too crimped or pressured or breached or anything like that. So you had to kind of work the sausages in and out of each other.
Hmm.
And so I've been doing some stuff like just I'm big on Maasai hops, as like the traditional African plyos. But I've been doing like lower impact ones barefoot on a Graham has me doing them on an incline, just like a little
Hmm.
grassy hill or something, you know what I mean? Just to get like different angles and stimulation. And then I also, he finally broke me down after years of effort and convinced me to get a pair of those toe shoes, the finger shoes.
Yeah.
I'm like, bro, I got to wear these in public now. Uh, but I just joking. And then I've actually got to the point where it's like, I do some, we have a cane corso who's like at that 9 month point. So he's already a giant dog, but already going to be more giant. And so I like to kind of keep his joints nice and healthy and prepared. So we'll go on like some very short, very slow 1 mile trots, just around the
Hmm.
neighborhood. My logic being doing this with him before he's full grown will help strengthen his bones and joints. And then when he's bigger, it won't be so bad to go for a little trot on some grass or whatever. Because they
Hmm.
get big, like you might, they get close to 200 pounds sometimes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like massive, massive. For reference, like a Rottweiler has a bite force of about 330 pounds. A cane corso's is more than 700.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're like, and it's not they're like what you would probably call a vestigial dog, like an ancient breed that was brought back. So they're like, oh, that's what dogs used to be like.
Right.
Great,
Yeah. Back when they were wolves still. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And he's sweet. Like, again, he didn't like crop his ears or do any of that. He's big floppy ears. Everything on him is big and floppy. He's just like
Hmm.
Clifford, the big red dog everywhere. But point
Yeah.
being, when I go on those little trots with him, I put on the toe shoes, and so it's definitely, it was less comfortable initially, and now it feels pretty good. But my long circuitous answer would be it's doing good, just aches when it's cold.
Just a quick reminder that Delta G ketones is my go to exogenous ketone source. You can get 20% off at deltagketones.com when you use promo code BITTER20. Check out my full description of how I use Delta G ketones at the end of the episode. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Cam Haines was in town a couple weeks ago, and I met up with him because he was trying to test out some shoes to find the most efficient pair for the Boston Marathon.
Oh,
And
nice.
he's got a broken foot, but I think his has been broken for a while now, and he just kind of keeps beating it up and not letting it heal. So
What happened with his?
I don't remember exactly what it was that caused it. I think he might not know. I'd have to ask him. I think like he noticed the discomfort and probably just pushed through and then eventually got around to getting an x-ray and then noticed it was broke.
Yeah,
And he'll come into town and get like stem cells and stuff with Ways to Well a
right.
few times a year and they check on it each time and I think it's still been broken each time and he's just not going to stop. So who knows
Yeah,
what the outcome there is if you don't ever
yeah,
let it heal or
yeah. Well, as long as it doesn't become necrotic, it just becomes arthritic. As it got, like
yeah.
I've had two broken fingers, one with a almost completely torn ligament for 2 years. So it's like I've been through this with my doctor, and he's like, "Well, I mean, you can stop using them." I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably not going to happen anytime soon." So, and he's like, "Well, you're just going to have arthritis." He's like, "Then you just get used to having 8 good fingers." And I was like, "Okay, I can do that." You know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fine. But yeah, I probably am due for some stem cells. And the one, I don't know, I might have waited too long for surgery, but at some point, though, one of them's an index finger, so it is kind of annoying. But beyond that,
Hmm.
um, yeah, it is what it is. Like, the body is incredibly good at adapting. Like, here's one for you. Many people might not know this, but I used to be a pretty serious jiu-jitsu competitor, and in
Hmm.
that world, it is very, very common for people not to have completely missing ligaments in their knees, LCLs, MCLs, all that.
Yeah.
just because they got caught in a leg lock and they're like, okay, well, this is my career for once. So I'm not going to take a year off for surgery recovery. I'm just going to figure
Hmm.
it out. And then the fact that a lot of jujitsu, you're not on your feet, it's dynamic and a lot of force and can be very painful, but you're not like cutting or sprinting like a football player. So it's like,
Hmm.
how much do I actually need that ligament when the muscles grow and compensate for it? Like, it's not great, but it'll work.
Yeah. Hmm.
But having said that, I'm obsessive about healing. So like, I'm just very fortunate to heal like apparently crazy fast. Um, and then again, for me, it's like I broke my foot, so I just bought an assault bike and I started
Yeah.
boxing more. And you know what I mean. And then that was 8 weeks, and that also coincided literally perfectly with my 8 week off season. So and then
Hmm.
I came back after 8 weeks and just I did more foot. So the other thing too might be of interest to you and people in general is I started a research. I went down a rabbit hole on bone healing,
Hmm.
and essentially um, the resistance, everyone knows resistance training is very good for bone density. Turns
Hmm.
out that the actual lifting of the weight does not that much for bone density. It helps, but most of the benefit comes from the eccentric and isometric portions of any given lift.
Hmm.
They stress the bone matrix more and therefore elicit more adaptation. And then, of course, better than anything is plyometrics. But
Yeah.
that makes sense because that's just impact over. But so it's like I was rehab, I started with like very basic isometrics. Like as soon as I could get up on my tippy toes, but and hold. And then once I could do that for a while, get up on the tippy toes, put more dig in with the big toe, hold there, and
Hmm.
then work to 1 foot, and then a little bit of weight, and then and then real slow eccentrics. And I noticed it really like it was uncomfortable at first, but like as Dr. Stuart McGill says, like if you're below three or 10, 3 out of 10 or lower on the pain scale, you're still, you're most likely accelerating adaptation rather than, aggravating.
Hmm.
So I just kind of use that as a operating metric and came back. And so, yeah, like I said, it healed really well. But for anyone who's looking at increasing bone density in a given area or systemically or trying to recover from an injury, isometrics and slow eccentrics, very, very helpful.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I know when I had a stress fracture a couple of years ago, the first thing I was able to bring back was some resistance training, and I wasn't able to do any kind of hopping or running for a while, but I could do some pulling off the ground and lowering weights fairly early in the process. And
Yep.
yeah, as long as you don't overdo it, then you speed up that process a little bit and just prepare yourself to not have it happen again. So
Yeah.
now I strength train all the time.
Yep. No, I know. Yeah, dude. That's the other thing. We gotta, sometime we gotta get in that. You have I don't think people understand how nutty your strength and conditioning routine is, bro. No,
I've been
seriously. Like,
pretty
it's good.
disciplined with it the last year or so. So that's been a good
No, dude,
value add, I think.
it's good. It's intelligent. It has a shit ton of volume. Like it is not for the faint of heart. So I mean, again, any elite athlete should, in my opinion, should be saying the same, whether you're a ballerina or a power lifter. Because it's like, well, that's getting more into the philosophy of, hey, we don't have very much time here. We have even less time near our physiological maximum. If you're an athlete, how much of your potential do you want to live on the table? But that's an
Yeah.
entirely separate conversation.
Hmm.
Having said that, yeah, I don't think people understand that Zach Bitter's strength and conditioning routine is legit. Also, that would be an excellent, if you haven't, I don't know if you have already, but that'd be an excellent one to offer on your website because I see people mess up strength and conditioning more than anything save diet when it comes to running.
Yeah. Yeah. I see it being, it's always been an issue in endurance. And for a while, it was a really big issue because I think there was the sort of messaging was you don't need to do it. In fact, you should do more running if you had time to strength work, which is, obviously what we know now, not the direction you want to go. But now I see so many like non-traditional runners coming into this sport that may have had prioritized strength and conditioning before that, and they're getting into running as a secondary like interest. Those folks tend to be very like they're already doing it, so it's like yeah, they're starting from a better place and then they already have the routine in place and they already have the mentality for it, the learning curve is done and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, now let's just phase the running into it, which is kind of an interesting, different strategy versus someone who's been an endurance athlete their whole life, never touched a weight. And now it's trying, okay, how do we phase this in a way that works well for where you're at and where you want to be.
Well, I think that you're an excellent ambassador for that latter group for sure because it should, you know what I mean. Additionally, you're going to extend your longevity. You're going to build your performance. Like who doesn't want to run better? and more pain-free and for longer,
Mhm.
but you're right, it is like it's very much different mindsets. Like you have the runners that's naturally artistic, flowy, like you know what I mean, movement and like very
Mhm.
natural, and then you have like the systematized, the reps and sets, the you know what I mean, the very regimented athletes or weightlifters coming to it. And I kind of have a foot in both worlds,
Yeah.
and but definitely I think people would be shocked by how much runners would be shocked by how much strength conditioning helps and how little you have to do to actually see a benefit in terms of
Mhm.
just longevity and not, and it's like I was telling our buddy Nick, we were doing that 100 miler together and whenever it was a few months ago, Nick from Ultra. And I was like, dude, it's not like people think like some crazy, like, highly intensity functional like specific workout or some crazy like David Goggins style, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I told him, I was like, give me 20 minutes of your time, 2 to 3 days a week, take
Mhm.
care of your whole body, and it'll change your life. Because he
Yeah.
wasn't doing anything. He's just like run. He's like, nah, I just run. Like I just run and don't eat meat. And I'm like, well, you beat me by 8 hours, so something's working. But
Yeah.
take my word, let's do some strength also.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
and even if just focusing on the more on your problem areas, your ankles, calves, tibs, like, but yeah, to your point, I've seen there's definitely like a big increase in like the machine like ultra runners, men, male and female, that you come out and you're like, oh my god, that person is doing all the things. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
And because it's what's that? That I believe she's French. That girl, she smoked me at the last thing we ran, but I think she was like one of the female ultra runner of the year this last year.
Oh,
Brown
Katie
hair,
Scheid.
small. It might be. But that her husband was out there crewing her, and I was watching like they were dialed in across the board, man.
Yeah.
Not just on like their logistics and everything, but like you could tell everything. But then again, she did not. Her facial expression didn't change the entire time she was kicking my ass either. It was just, it's just like just. But yeah, what was that? She ran 100. Ran a pretty smoking 100. Anyway, point being, yeah, I think the days of like I was listening to someone else talk about the days of kind of being able to just coast and do well are over. Like in terms of
Mhm.
like if your goal is to be competitive in the sport, or in my case, not trying to be competitive, just trying to like push the weirdness of it a bit. Like
Mhm.
I think the days of kind of phoning it in are over.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people are going to specialize, and it'll be something where, like, if you want to be really good at a mountain 100 miler, you probably got to be doing that sort of training and focusing on those type of races. And then if you want to do a flat, short loop one, you've probably got to be doing more of that stuff if you really want. We're getting there. I think there's still like some crossover where you get some of the really, really really good ultra runners that are like, oh, they're kind of doing really well at a variety of distances and even variety of different terrains. We'll get to a point where it's more like the Olympics, where like it's just so rare that you see someone like win the Olympic marathon and also win something shorter than that. It's going to be hard to do that because someone's always going to be like just laser focused on that one very thing and every little aspect that goes into that. And I actually just did a podcast recently on like I titled it "Fit but Unhealthy," um,
Yeah,
but it was kind of this idea of just optimizing for something like with when you get something that's got enough competitive pressure that and at the world level, it's like there's trade-offs where it's like to be your absolute best at this, you actually have to actively be bad at that. And that thing you're bad at might be good for longevity. So
yep.
so I think there's a lot of you get into a bit of a kind of a compromise to some degree when you're trying to peak for anything specifically. At least if you're I think really the solution to that probably is like when you finish your competitive career and get outside of that physiological window you were talking about before, like, don't avoid the things that you did for performance as you transition into retirement. Focus on those maybe more so and make sure you're kind of closing some of those gaps up.
Yeah, well, it's like the mountain when he retired, or retired from like his mainstream career as a strongman. He lost 100 pounds because he's like, I
Yeah.
want my heart to still work. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so it's the same thing. But no, and also I think something that kind of gets skipped over a lot with this is like the personality aspect, the human aspect, because different types of training develop different parts of your psyche. I don't care what anyone
Hmm.
says. Like if you develop the mental strength of an ultra runner, that's going to impact who you are as a human being. If
Hmm.
you build the grit of a competitive power lifter by hanging out with fucking working out with Mark Bell every day of the week, like that's going to change the way that you approach hard things in life. If you go and you train jujitsu for 3 years with a black belt, that's going to change how comfortable you are walking around in your skin or around human conflict or any, whatever, or playing
Hmm.
chess, because it's that's all it is a game of human chess. Like whatever the training modalities you select impact the person you become, and you can reverse engineer that from the warrior societies all around the world, which is why Polynesians train differently than Greek runners trained. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And they had very different mindsets, lifestyles, like that. These are physical expressions of our personalities, and much like the CIA truth tellers and interviewers will tell you, it's like every word that comes out of a human being is a result of the contents of their brain. Like
Hmm.
it's a hyper simple logic, and it's the same thing with the physical expressions of what's inside of us. So it's like if I had a strong genetic inclination towards like short sprinting, like very 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 high, potentially like Olympic level. But if I had just done that and not done built endurance, built strength, built skills, but any other stuff, like I would be a very different actual person today than I am.
Hmm.
And so I think it's important to kind of keep track of like, oh, these aren't just like, this isn't just our physical activities don't occur in a human vacuum.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to think that way, though.
Yeah. So I think the more stuff that you do, even if it's not serious, even if you dabble, like I will occasionally go to a yoga class. I know nothing about yoga. I embarrass myself in there. Every 80-year-old woman is stronger and more flexible in these positions, but it's cool because it's
Hmm.
something I don't know. It's something I knew. And I personally love being a white belt and a thing all over again.
Yeah.
Like if I lift, if I run, if I grapple, like I have some degree of competency and experience over multiple years and all those things. But like to engage in a new thing, it's fun. I'm actually my wife and I are about to start whooping on each other in a ancient Egyptian board game. So it's like and again, new skill. I am probably going to lose. She's generally starts better at baseline than me than those things. So, but having said that, like it's important to kind of branch out of these things, and it doesn't have to become your identity. But I think it's important to remember that.
Hmm. Yeah, no doubt. So what's the start date of the 1,000 mile?
June 1st in
Okay.
Tijuana, or technically, San Diego. I'm gonna start literally right as close to the border as I can without getting shot at.
Yeah. There you
But
go. Well, that's gonna
so
be
yeah,
fun. Just a quick reminder that Krantz is my go-to pre-workout supplement for improving blood flow, increasing fat oxidation, reducing muscle damage, and delaying fatigue. Krantz leverages the research on the black currant berry extract to formulate the right dosage. Head over to currantsusa.com. That's curranzusa.com to check them out, as well as all the research outlined.
yeah. So June 1st, and then we're looking at a roughly 28 to 30 day logistical time frame. We could extend that a little bit, but and then outside of just kind of having to be at this certain point for filming or this certain point for that, I'm just kind of I've always like when people refer to me as an ultra runner, I'm like, I guess that's technically true, but like at the operating level, I'm more just kind of a weird wanderer. Probably more to do with Forrest Gump than Zach Bitter. But yeah, so that's the part of it for me that I'm always looking forward to, and then I'm going to see some really cool sights along the way. The 57-mile day or the back-to-back 57s. That another thing that's going to kind of help with that is that detour is going to a really cool fortress called Painted Rock Fortress on the Carrizo Plain, or the Carrizo Plain Monument.
Mhm.
It is a 4,000-year-old altered natural rock formation that has finger painting and hand paintings on it going back literally 4,000 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
it is the most cool and powerful site I've ever been to in my life. Like it's taller than the walls of Rome, ancient Rome. Like, you know what I mean? It's in this
Mhm.
weird natural, like it's the craziest thing ever. And so that'll be a cool thing. Like, the plan is to get there right around, sunset golden hour so I can see it and get some filming and, do all the documentary stuff, whatever the crew has to do. I actually haven't been read in on all that yet. And so that will be something. Like, I know I'll be running 57 miles towards a powerful moment on the first day. And then, maybe basking in it on the 57, coming back to the coast on the second day.
Hmm.
So that'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got a lot of cool like add-ins there
Yeah.
with that route that'll be
Yeah.
really motivating, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the mental side of things. I honestly find it better when I just don't really think about it that much. It's like I find, like, the old Greek philosophers used to say, like, he who suffers in his mind suffers twice, or suffers
Yeah.
more than necessary. So I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna happen. Like, I know I'm looking forward to all of it, but I just kind of don't really hang out with people who think stuff of like that's like atypical. Like, I talked to you, like when I told you about this, you're like, oh, that's gonna be fun. Like
Yeah.
if I tell someone at the grocery store, like, hey, I'm gonna go try to run 1,000
Yeah.
miles,
Look at you
with
like they have
minimal
three
support.
heads. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's fine. That's cool. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But like when I'm trying to get dialed in, I don't want my consciousness. I don't want that in my
Hmm.
consciousness. Like, this should just be normal. It should be a day at the office. And so I'm
Yeah.
just kind of looking forward to just the roaming, wandering aspect of it. Not coming into it with the same level of naivete that I did in the 500 miler. Now knowing what 500 feels like, I have somewhat of an idea of what to expect from 1,000 plus or 1,100 plus. But
Hmm.
uh, yeah, generally just kind of going in very grateful, I guess would be the word. Just very grateful to be able to do it, and then and just really looking forward to seeing all the stuff along the way, and et cetera, et cetera. Still getting footwear stuff dialed in, but I played with those Mount to Coast R1s. Really like those for road sections.
Yeah.
And with a few things for trail. You recommended I try out those Nordas, and I think I'm going to order a pair of those to try out too. Honestly, I kind of forgot to get shoes for my trail ultra that I'm running this weekend, so I dusted off like an old pair of Solomons that I had bought as an
Okay.
experimental pair, and I'm like, that'll work. It's only a day.
Yeah.
It's only a day, and it's only a day. I'm not going fast, so that'll work. Um, but so yeah, I'm still dialing the trail shoes. The main thing there is obviously, I like just there's a few of the top ultra trail models I like. Problem is the only ones I've tried it emit too much sand. Like, they're not designed for sand running. What shoe is.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's really down to like not what the best performance shoe is, but the one that fits my shoe and emits the least amount of sand,
Yeah. I
even with a
wonder,
gator.
have you looked at Speedland's trail models yet?
I didn't even know they had one. I didn't know anything about them until I saw Cam post something about his shoe that he released with them, but I didn't even know they had trail shoes.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, so they actually started with trail models, and they just recently, their
Cool.
road model they just came out with is their first play out of road shoe.
Oh,
And that
cool.
one might be interesting for what you're doing because they're a higher price point shoe, but they're also like I think it's like a 2x longevity type of a play with it. So it's like, yeah, you pay more for it, but it's gonna last you longer, so it's gonna average itself out over time. And I like what they've done with kind of like the wrapping of the upper and the boa lacing there, where you
Yeah.
might have an easier time keeping sand out of those. Or
Okay.
if it is something where there's no way around it, the boa lacing is going to be easier to pop that thing off and on and dump the sand out if you need to. Um, or even over the course of the event, being able to just because you may find what feels perfect at the beginning won't feel perfect in the middle, and then having that level of customability, customizability with it over the
Yeah.
course of the event might be worthwhile to look at. Yeah, there's so many options out there now, but those ones would be.
Okay.
Um, I mean, Norda and Speedline, I think, are both doing really cool things on the trail.
I'll order a pair from both and check both out because it's for me it's the biggest thing is just peace. Like, I don't care too much about getting the most kinetic return or performance out of my shoe. I just don't
Mhm.
want to think about it. For me, I just want a
Right.
piece of to be able to put on and forget about it. And then the thing is, too, when I think it was Sonora, I did in the Mont Blanc boas.
Hmm.
I love that boa system, man. For me, shaky hands, cold, sometimes,
Yeah.
don't, like doing my own gear stuff in a tent at the end of the day, it could be kind of hard. That I think I've talked about that before, but for me, like that's always the biggest frustration is just doing the little, the purifying water, the cleaning, the
Hmm.
stitching things, and your hands are just shaking. So that was a huge time saver for me. So yeah, if I could find another pair that have a laceless system, I'm very, very inclined for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good design. I like that setup for a variety of reasons, but I think for what you're doing, it makes even more sense in a lot of cases. So cool.
I'm thinking. I think we got everything. I'll text you if I think of anything else. But I'm pretty sure that the big thing, yeah, figuring out prioritizing hydration is something that definitely we're going to focus on more, and then that the system of the diet too. I've done fluid loss stuff at the extremes for heat, but
Hmm.
never as like a triple point. To provide 3 data points. That also makes sense given the fact that over a month I could see some different weather, even though the coast shouldn't be too inclement, hopefully.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I'll start playing with that, and then I will talk to you again. I have some time before my yeah, we got a good amount of time before the 5 day experiment, so I'll reach out to you before that, and maybe we can dial in some
Yeah.
specifics on some
Just
metrics.
collect some questions and we'll set up another call and
Okay. Yeah.
chat
Yeah. Oh,
about
yeah.
it.
And Stu, anyway, like I have no idea if this is provides value to the listeners or anything like that, but I'm always down to do coaching. I do our coaching, make our coaching calls public for their edification and listening if they just want to see. Also, like I think it's cool as someone who just has spent the last few months planning, a multi-week 1,000+ mile run, and realizing there was almost no actual data or information out there to like go on or sculpt a plan with. I think it's good to kind of be exploring this publicly because
Yeah.
we're only going to see more and more people kind of want to do 1,000+ mile runs and ultras, and it really requires a very different approach than going in for a hot 100 or 200 miler.
Hmm. Well, one thing I learned about, I have like a group coaching package where they all follow like their plan for the distance they're training for, but then we meet weekly and just chat as a group. And what I
Right.
always find is someone will have a question that maybe is really unique to them and their specific thing, but it sort of either generates or highlights a question that other people had but didn't know they had. So you end up kind of getting really good conversation and thought processes out of it. So yeah, these type of episodes are always fun because you just chat about even if it's a very specific thing, someone might be thinking, well, I'm doing a 100 miler and I've never thought about fluid loss rates. Probably important for that too. And then, they maybe explore that or like
Yeah.
you said, like, someone is interested in ultra marathon running, but isn't really thinking about strength work or something like that. And then it's a good idea generator, if nothing else.
Yeah. Oh, I also feel the point. I should point out that when I first started listening to your podcast, I don't think I'd run anything at the time. I don't think I'd run anything at all. So I think in the beginning, I was just one of those guys that was just kind of listening out of curiosity before getting sucked into the whole vortex of it all. So it's like if you're one of those people and you're like, oh, this is interesting, or hey, I've done a 10K or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
just like, I don't know if I'm encouraging you or warning you that the route is shorter. It's much shorter than you think it is. So take that
Yeah.
for what it's worth. But yeah, man, it's just like I'm writing this book right now. This isn't like promotional or anything. It's still a long way off. But I'm writing this book right now on how to integrate the lessons of history's top warriors and to live a better life. Not as a
Uh-huh.
fighter. It's not an art of war knockoff. It's literally like um, focusing on very basic things like that honor is still relevant, and honor being in the more modern sense like, hey, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and I
Hmm.
am the person behind closed doors that I present to the world, like all these little things. Some of it's strategic, some of it is like introducing the principle of kaizen that the samurai used, that Westerners, we tend to view progress in like home runs and big chunks, like you need these grand displays to represent progress. Whereas the samurai, the Japanese businessmen today use something called kaizen, which is what you would call the compounding effect of incremental daily gain. And it's like they
Hmm.
knew that growing 1 inch every day added up to 500 inches every year, not 365, but 500,
Yeah.
opposed to maybe the typical American mindset where you're like, no, I'm going to crush this problem. It's some grand display, some home runs, some what I mean, some Michael
Hmm.
Jordan jump shot at the buzzer. Like that's how problems get solved. That's how progress is made. When 95% of the time that's not true. It's
Hmm.
the quiet moment. So anyway, long story short, I've been thinking about these things a bit more, and it's I think it is, life is short, and if you feel compelled to do something that you think is crazy, like run a hundred miler, or do whatever that thing is, I think now is probably the best time. And it's not shaming people or even motivating them. It's just like taking on the balance. The ancient philosopher Seneca said time is the one thing you should be selfish with.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're feeling, if you like doing something like that, man, go for it. If you like
Yeah.
hopping
Just
on,
start the process at
yeah.
least.
Or just
Hmm.
shoot Zach a message. Like that's the other thing. You were the first. No, seriously though, I think you were the first person with like any sort of following and true like expertise that like I just shot a random DM to as like a guy with like 100 followers on Instagram was like, hey, like this insert super basic question here, and I got like a real answer from you, and I was like, oh, whoa, okay, cool. So it's like it's to those of you listening, Zach is highly responsive with that. He's the guy that gave me my first ultra running tips, and still the guy years later when I'm chasing some pretty big goals that I come to, first. So I think anyone who's curious, don't got to sign up, don't got to do anything, just shoot Zach a message, and he will give you an honest answer.
Yeah. Right on.
But well, yeah, let's talk soon. I will. I'll start a little note in my phone and put down any questions, and then I will
Yeah.
text you. We can set up another call, maybe either just before or just after the 5 day block as we get a little closer.
Perfect. Awesome,
Sound good?
James. It was great to chat.
Yeah. Also, what warrior do we? Or I'm sorry, what running culture do we got next? We've done so. Apache was our last one, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think we were either gonna do Raramari or
Kalenjin,
um
maybe.
yeah. I think that's what we said.
Yeah,
So
we did. So I remember I had just researched that. So I had some fresh stuff on them from the last book that I put out. Yeah.
mhm.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think I mean, I'm sure we'll lock it down behind the scenes, but I think we're talking next month or so. If anyone's
Yeah.
interested in learning wait, hold on, let me think of a good hook for this. The unstoppable high altitude ancestral training methods of the Kalenjin that put forth the ultimate Olympic dream team of runners like Kipchoge and Kelvin Kiptum. How's that?
Yeah. There you go. Perfect. That's a
All right.
good hook. We'll get
Yeah.
people with that one.
Sounds good. All right. We'll talk soon, man.
All right, take care. Thanks for sticking around and listening to how I use the show sponsors. Maui Nui Venison is a product I discovered last year. What caught my eye was their quality and business model. They have paired the need to manage an invasive species with providing some of the most nutrient dense meat you will find. The axis deer arrived in Maui in single digits but grew fast and have damaged the local ecosystem, and if left unchecked, are projected to reach up to 200,000 in number in future years. Maui Nui decided to solve this problem and minimize waste. Axis deer meat provides 43% of your daily value of protein in just 107 calories and boasts a 1.5 to 1 omega 6 to omega 3 ratio, which is the most balanced ratio of any red meat. This same 107 calories provides 22% of your daily value of vitamins and 37% of your daily value of minerals. They have a wide range of products including ground venison, leg medallions, rib chops, strip loin, loin fillets, and loin chops. They also make a beef stick that includes an option with organ meats, which makes a perfect protein-packed snack that I will usually have in the afternoon before a strength session. I've also been enjoying the ground venison for dinner, usually paired with steamed vegetables or a sweet potato. You can find a bunch of recipes and ways to prepare their products on their website at mauinuivenison.com. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte supplement. Based on my electrolyte loss rate of 614 milligrams per liter, I begin my day with half a packet of one of their hot beverage flavors with my morning coffee. I rotate through all of them, but my favorite at the moment is the chocolate mint. Later in the day, I have been having either a packet of their watermelon flavor or a can of Element Sparkling, which is their carbonated electrolyte drink. I usually have the black cherry lime or watermelon flavor for those. If you are curious about how to dial in your own fluid and electrolyte setup, check out episode 300 of this podcast, where I dive into some of the things you can do at home to gauge how much fluid and electrolytes you may need. A free sample pack with your first purchase can be found at drinklmnt.com/HPO. Delta G ketones is the best researched exogenous ketone supplement on the market. The research on exogenous ketones is constantly evolving. Delta G is responsible for much of it, hosting 50 plus published studies and 20 plus ongoing studies, and have received DARPA grants designed for special forces. Delta G uses ketone esters, which is unmatched in raising blood ketone levels when matched per gram. The best use case, as the evidence currently stands, is as a post-workout supplement for better recovery and or during longer, lower intensity sessions to help with mental focus. For this reason, I will have a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's the little blue bottle, after my biggest workouts for the week and during long run training sessions once I have been out running for about 45 to 60 minutes. Head over to deltagketones.com and enter BITTER20 for 20% off your next purchase. Curranz, which is spelled Curranz, is a pre-workout supplement that I started using this year based on the evidence that it can help improve blood flow, allowing for improved muscle oxygenation, which can potentially enhance endurance performance. It also can increase fat oxidation, reduce muscle damage, and delay fatigue. Black currants are rich in anthocyanins, a type of antioxidants which may contribute to their health benefits. The research suggests benefits can be seen after a week of usage pre-exercise. I take 2 capsules of currants before each morning training session. During longer races, I will be taking an extra 2 capsules every 4 hours. Currants has been used for lots of the research on black currants, so be sure to head over to curranzusa.com, that's CURRANZUSA.com, to check them out and the latest studies. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.